For Britain in the UK, Gallipoli is just a campaign, a historical campaign, happened 100 years ago, lasted 8 months, was a glorious failure, and we just study it, and it's probably a footnote in a lot of the history books today. However, you go to Australia, New Zealand, or even Turkey, it's totally different. You have books dedicated to it as opposed to just a chapter. And for them, it was the making of a nation, so nationhood for Australia. And this is the first time that the Australian Army had fought together. Same for the New Zealanders as well. And through good bit of marketing and PR, through journalists like Keith Murdoch and Ashmead Bartlett, across the papers in Australia, you had these fantastic headlines about the Australian soldiers, doing good, brave, courageous. And it was almost sold to Australia as a victory, but let down by incompetent leadership. Incompetent British leadership.
Well, why do you think they were intent on doing that? At that time, of course, they were part of the British Empire.
Yes.
Why would they have taken that out?
Very interesting. During that time, so 1914-18, and even post-war, an Australian would think themselves first as British, second as an Australian. And it's only in the later years, the 1960s, where you had a lot of immigration into Australia, especially from the UK. They used to call them 10 bob poms, used to come over on this almost free ticket to come and emigrate in their country, take their jobs. So there's a lot of resentment from Britain. And also there's a stronger Republican feel, where not necessarily anti-monarchist. I think they asked questions was, why is the Queen still the head of the country? Why are we still being really governed by London and not Canberra or elsewhere? And that's really driven through media, films like Peter Weir's Gallipoli, through lots of press, the myth almost that it was an Australian-won campaign but let down by British command and leadership.
So you think that was really a myth that was built up by Australia in the later years?
That
wouldn't have been the case at the time of the war itself?
Absolutely, and what's quite interesting about Australia is you have propaganda, and propaganda is usually strong during the war years, and truth comes out later. Interesting with Gallipoli, it's the complete opposite. You get a lot of truth during the war years, but the propaganda is later years, spun by the government and the politicians to their own sort of self-interest.